The Crooked Epic. 1. Inn. 1. The Inn of Maniacal Madness. 2. Ted. The Graveyard. 2C. 2. Ted was never a mischievous child nor deceptive to anyone. As long as he was alive, he had looked up to Alex and their father, and he valued the laws of America and the rules of the house. They all seemed to fit with his experience as a human, and he held no grudge against anything he had been exposed to. If anybody had ever tried to convince him of things in the world which were different from his neighborhood, it would confuse him, because this was the natural world and God gave things that were governed by man's final sanction. He was intelligent, and Ted tried to be pleasant and conscientious of himself. Ted often used his intellect to earn respect through philanthropy. The things to come to fruition that summer adjusted those sentiments through accumulating amounts of unexplainable events which challenged that perception of life. When Father closed the door behind him, and while Alex leaped up the stairs to his room and pounced onto his reading, Ted carefully examined something he saw in the mud by the tool shed. The rain had subsided, and he could smell the heat of the summer grab the moisture of the ground into humidity. A large footprint had imprinted the dirt, so Ted cautiously crept up to investigate the scene closer during the moments of cleared weather. Tiny slugs crawled around the rippling puddle, disappearing in the mud and leaving slime trails. Still, he was caught in the muddy, midstream momentum of their abandoned lost dog search party and the mysterious behaviors of their father that week. He thought of Alex and his friends. They had made big decisions and intricate plans. On inspection, Ted noticed large boots made the pair of footprints. They went into the tool shed on the side of the barn, where he saw how some of the tools had been moved around. The saw was taken down off its rack, and some teeth were chipped blunt, and it was bent. The axe was missing too, from where it was usually sitting by the door to the barn. Not much else was different in the barn. The spare red gas can was still in the back, and the screwdriver kit and hammer were still on the table, where the toolbox was shut. But as Ted stared at the tools on the workbench, he imagined the only valuable things an axe could accomplish: wood cutting or tree chopping, or breaking through things or into places. The season was not suitable for any of those tasks, so if someone had borrowed the tools while they were gone, or if their father had come home and left already, were the only logical reasons which could have caused these tools to be misplaced. Outside the tool shed, Ted looked at the edge of the mud puddle, imprinted by the same large boot at an angle towards the woods. He decided to follow the tracks to at least the tree line where he saw them lead. The backyard was quiet, and there was only a slight breeze in the air as he stepped toward the trees which encompassed the yard. There was a buzzing in his ears as he neared the outer limits of the dank forest. Breaking the silence was a crackling of sticks to his left, loudly echoing against the brush in front of him. He heard a dog barking twice and was in more raucous movement from deep within. Inevitably, he pursued into the tall grass, trying to spy on the sources stealthily. His interest in remaining unseen could not prevent his conspicuity from being as quickly forgotten as his allegiance to the household behind him. Ted pressed through the thickets, only able to glimpse pieces of some rapid movements farther past bare tree trunks and tangled bushes. Although obscurely, Ted remembered everything deeper in the woods was blurred and partially obstructed from his view by the dense branches and trees, especially on the hilly terrain with ups and downs and curving sides, which eventually led to a large escalating hill almost half a mile into the northeast, rising high above any trees' tops. The movement near the summits and around the inclining and declining rocky, wild, and tree-covered dark hills to the north drew Ted's attention. As he began to walk a little further, a fast and robust animal brushed his lower thigh from behind, and when he looked down, the black dog was running away to the northeast near the giant hill in his periphery. Immediately, Ted shouted at the dog, but it ran forward another 40 feet before stopping atop a foothill and growling lowly at the woods on the rising hill. In his frustration, Ted slowed his running down from a jog to a rest, bending his arms over his kneecaps while he caught his breath and silently assessed the probability of seeing the dog alone. Nearly 50 feet from the bottom of the massive hill and within only 20 feet of the black dog standing on the smaller foothill, he heard the angry shout behind him, a voice he did not recognize. Turning his head to look over his shoulder, he saw a large man with a freshly stubbled beard and wild and uncombed hair. He was wearing the black and white striped jumpsuit they gave the prisoners in the movies which Ted had seen, and he knew he was coming to get him. Clumsily, he nearly toppled over in panic as he began clambering up the hillside, while he saw the dog speed up and over a top, then around the side to the north. Not knowing what else a good strategy at this point would be, he decided to follow the dog up the giant hill. Luckily, as Ted looked back down from much further up the hill, the man had started several hundred feet back and was impeded by the chains and handcuffs around his wrists. He had broken the chains around his feet, but the steep and muddy hill was a difficult climb for him. Nearing the top, Ted climbed higher still, but the man was 100 yards away. Ted also searched his surroundings for the dog as he hurtled up over the rock, dirt, and roots on the hilltop side which he had run up. He began to realize the futility of the chances of escape and the imminent horror if he were apprehended. Ted became desperate for some distraction, diversion, or trick which might win him time or favor in his struggle. The dog barked from somewhere and he searched all around the hill. He noticed the mouth of a cave opening against the hill, surrounded by the roots of 2 giant sycamore trees. At the top of the cave was a poison hemlock, and inside were giant boulders, some of which were covered with what looked like quartz. Quickly, he went into the cave and scrambled through until he quietly slowed down and hid behind a jutting rock, 100 feet inside the damp earth. Through the dank tunnel's holes and creeping gravely corners, dirt and sodden ground which raised into stalagmites and leaning walls covered in quartz and root veins, he scampered away from the opening light until it disappeared. It was replaced slowly with glowing quartz, which shone on the rocky surfaces throughout the catacombs like hazy magical lamps. He hesitated in his escape to listen intently to the echoing silence that filled the damp air. Shuffling footsteps behind him grabbed his heart and raised his fears into unstoppable levels. The terror escalated as the sound of tinkling and swiping metal chain dragged behind the phantom aggressor filled the void of noiseless black darkness. Frenetically, Ted pushed himself forward away from the tunnel and kept running away, chasing after the dog as the prey was being hunted by the predator. When the descending tunnel started to level off a dimly lit bottom, Ted was frantically worried if he would reach the end so far into the cave that he would be lost forever. Mysteriously, a wind began to fill the air around him, and as he walked, Ted noticed less and less of the glowing quartz of the rocks and boulder edges he had fallen into. There was the sensation of grass around his feet like a mowed field, and he saw above, to his complete astonishment, what appeared to be stars filling a cloudless night sky, but no moon in sight. Ted's foot hit a big stone on the ground and he tripped over it, stubbing his toe and stumbling into a half somersault until he landed atop a fresh dirt mound. Directly in front of it, another large and upright stone. For a second, he looked behind himself until he could recognize the type of stone. He waited quietly in the hush of the night to see if he heard the chains of the man who chased him. However, it was quiet, with just a slight breeze of a warm summer evening. The stone was a grave marker. Getting up off the ground, Ted stooped low, brushed off his clothes, and waited for almost 2 full minutes, crouching and hiding. The air buzzed with the sound of insects, and some beetles were crawling around the ground abruptly. Terrified, he stared behind himself into the void of blackness he had run from. Ted's left shoelace was untied, so he stayed bent to tie another knot. Then he heard a voice behind, another surreally unrecognizable voice. "Barry, you hear?" Frightened and tired, Ted started weeping while he ran back away from the voice behind him to the black void. The sense of the natural cave which he had fallen through began to surround him again as he clumsily ran away. The feeling of safety and security of home kept him going as strong and as fast as he could. Around boulders and over rocks and hills in the cave, he ran out into the sun-setting sky above the hill. When he finally staggered into the backyard, covered in dirt and sweat, tears drying his cheeks, he saw his father's car in the driveway. He was in trouble if he did not think of a good excuse to tell everyone quickly. So he ran over to the barn, to the tool shed, hoping that his family hadn't noticed him. Climbing the ladder, Ted felt afraid again, briefly wondering if the man in the woods would come grab him. But he made it to the table and sat in the chair for a moment, trying to catch his breath. The magazine that Ted had told Alex about much earlier was laying on the other table, so we finally stood up to gather it and retreat inside the house. It was the best thing he could think of to lie about how he stayed up in the loft alone all afternoon. Out of nowhere, as if to put a cap on the bottle of adventures which he had just been through, a tiny cat cried in the corner of the loft, way to the back of the barn. He witnessed out of the corner of his eye the stray, all-white cat jumping down off the loft platform onto a firewood pile against the back wall. To his knowledge, there were no house cats anywhere in their neighboring area, so this was strange to him. As Ted walked over to where the stray cat had been, he was paying close attention to everything around him, because he was still not sure if the crazy man would return and try to attack him. There was nothing out of the ordinary, yet he noticed something laying on the haystack. When he climbed back down the ladder, he walked over and picked up an ancient golden amulet engraved with thousands of etchings in the spirals Ted had never seen before. Inside the house, he realized how he had only been gone about half an hour, and nobody seemed to miss him. Guessing it was luck, Ted hid the amulet in his pocket and washed himself up. Mostly, he was compelled to retain the family's tranquility and avoid causing trouble. However, the mystic powers of the amulet already began coercing his behavior immediately. He was awash with a strange sense of compelling fate and destiny.